At 7:14 a.m. on the morning of her son's valedictorian graduation, Rebecca Reeves answered a call that would define the day.
Rebecca, I can't come to Matthew's graduation. Sophia's jazz recital is tonight, and it's very important to her. Matthew is a smart boy. He'll have plenty of other big moments. Sophia is more sensitive. You understand? Okay, Mom.
She ended the call and stared at her untouched coffee. The kitchen felt smaller, the air heavier.
40 years. She's been excusing herself for 40 years.
When Matthew came downstairs in his cap and dress shirt, his smile was bright and unsuspecting.
Morning, Mom. Big day, right?
He doesn't know. And he won't. Not until after.
So Rebecca straightened his honor cord and hid the wound behind a mother's pride. Downstairs, David Reeves had coffee and keys ready. He glanced up, saw the strain beneath his wife's smile.
Everything okay?
She couldn't say it aloud, that her mother had chosen a dance recital over this day.
The pattern was decades old. Carolyn had missed Matthew's second-grade play, his science fair, his eighth-grade award night. Each time she'd sent the same message. Sophia needed her more. Matthew was resilient. Rebecca was expected to understand.
But this time wasn't just another school event. This was his valedictorian speech, a once-in-a-lifetime moment.
Dad, don't let Mom be nervous. I've got this speech down cold. It's going to be great.
David squeezed Rebecca's hand. He didn't know the full truth, but he knew his wife well enough to stand beside her. They drove to the high school under a golden afternoon sky. Rebecca stared out the window, memorizing the silence. When they pulled into the parking lot, Matthew straightened his cap and headed for the side entrance. The ceremony was minutes away. Inside the auditorium, Rebecca and David walked down the crowded aisle. The front row was marked for valedictorian family. One chair in that row held a small white placard, reserved for Carolyn Hargrove. It sat empty, conspicuous among the filled seats.
She felt the emptiness like a spotlight. Every relative would notice the missing grandmother. Every glance would ask a question she couldn't answer.
Across town, Carolyn settled into a creaky auditorium seat, holding a program with Sophia's name circled in bright ink.
That's my granddaughter, the one in the pink costume. Isn't she lovely?
She applauded warmly, her phone already filled with photos of Sophia's first pose, utterly unaware of the seat she wasn't in. Back at the graduation, the rows filled with families. The stage glowed under warm lights. The MC approached the microphone. Rebecca gripped David's hand. He didn't ask, he just held on, anchoring her to the moment. The MC welcomed everyone and invited the graduates to begin the processional. Applause swelled through the hall. The auditorium lights dimmed. The ceremony was about to begin, and the empty chair remained a silent accusation. The graduates filed in as the band played. Rebecca watched them, but her eyes kept drifting to the empty chair with the placard. Patricia, a sharp-eyed family friend, leaned over from the row behind.
Rebecca, honey, where's Carolyn? That front row seat has her name on it? Is she running late? She had a conflict. Sophia's recital. You know how my mother is.
Her voice was steadier than she felt. David's hand covered hers, anchoring her.
Don't ask more, Patricia. Just don't.
The ceremony wore on. Other speeches, awards, polite clapping. Rebecca's pulse never slowed. Finally, the MC announced, "Our valedictorian, Matthew Reeves." The room erupted. Backstage, Matthew straightened his cap and walked toward the wing, his face calm, his secret speech folded in his pocket. Rebecca gripped David's knee, unaware that backstage, Matthew was about to discover the reason for that empty seat on his own. Matthew paused in the wing, one hand on the curtain, the other reaching for his phone. A quick check. Just one. The family group chat was alive, not with congratulations for him, but with photos from a dance recital across town. A photo filled the screen, Carolyn in her peach dress beaming beside Sophia. The caption read, "So proud of our girl."
So that's where she is. He'd suspected the favoritism for years. Every missed event, every excuse, but he'd hoped today might be different.
The empty front row seat suddenly made a harsh, clear sense. She had chosen Sophia again on today of all days.
A cold certainty settled in his chest. He wouldn't let this slide. Not today.
He closed the chat, pocketed the phone, and straightened his cap. His breath came steady. When he stepped from the wing into the light, his expression was unreadable. A polite smile, something harder beneath. The applause swelled around him. His mother couldn't see the storm behind his eyes. Matthew's eyes swept over the crowd, pausing on the front row. The empty chair with its white placard seemed to shout in the silence.
There it was. The proof. She hadn't even called.
A chill traced down Rebecca's spine. Why was he staring at that seat? He couldn't know. She hadn't told him.
For a split second, mother and son locked eyes. Rebecca saw something unfamiliar in his gaze, a quiet, steely resolve. The MC announced Matthew's name. The crowd rose in applause. Matthew stepped forward, his face calm but unyielding. He walked with measured steps, his cap straight, his honors cord shining under the lights. The room seemed to hold its breath. At the podium, Matthew centered his notes, then gripped its edges. His gaze fell once more on the empty chair.
Rebecca's heart hammered. He's going to say something. Something I can't stop.
He leaned into the microphone, and his first words were standard, gracious. The audience settled, expecting a typical speech. But Rebecca's hands trembled. She knew her son, and she knew the calm before a storm.
Thank you to the faculty, my coach, and all the families here today. This graduation is a shared achievement. But before I continue, I need to acknowledge something that's been true for a long time.
His voice changed. The room felt it. He gestured slowly toward the front row, toward the empty chair with its white placard.
There is a seat in the front row reserved for my grandmother, Carolyn Hargrove, who chose to be elsewhere today.
The auditorium went still. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just 500 people holding the same breath. Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth, a strangled gasp slipping out before she could stop it.
He knew. Oh God, he knew all along.
David's jaw tightened. He covered Rebecca's knee with his hand, his own eyes fixed on their son. Behind them, Patricia fumbled for her phone, her thumbs moving by instinct. She hit record. Matthew let the silence stretch. His hand still gripped the podium, and the room waited, afraid to breathe.
I'm naming that seat publicly because for the rest of my life, when I tell this story, I want to remember something clearly. That my mother, Rebecca Reeves, showed up to every second grade play, every science fair, every parent-teacher night. And that my grandmother, Carolyn Hargrove, chose to be elsewhere for each one, every single time.
Rebecca's tears spilled over. She made no sound, but her shoulders began to shake. David pulled her closer.
All those years he saw everything. He'd been keeping score just like she had.
David's jaw trembled, but his eyes were proud. He didn't look at the empty seat. He looked at his son. Patricia held her phone steady, recording every word. Her lips moved silently. Holy hell.
This seat isn't just a chair, it's a record, a witness to who shows up and who doesn't. Let it be public. Let it be permanent.
Matthew paused, letting the weight settle. Then he continued, his voice steady, the hardest words already spoken.
So let's take this moment, and this class, a class that showed up for each other and promised to keep showing up, wherever life takes us. Thank you, and congratulations to every single graduate here. We earned this together.
The applause that followed was not polite. It was a wave, thunderous, rising, lasting far longer than any other ovation that night. Rebecca couldn't stand. She sobbed into David's shoulder, her body shaking with release. David held her, his own eyes wet. Patricia lowered her phone, her thumbs already tapping out a caption. "You need to see this, right now." She hit send. The video hit the family group chat at 8:17 p.m. It spread to cousins, aunts, neighbors, the digital weight of the speech moving faster than any rumor.
It's out there now, everyone will know.
Across town during a pause in the dance recital, Carolyn's phone buzzed against her thigh. She didn't look. Sophia's jazz number was starting. The ceremony moved on. More diplomas, more names, but every person in that auditorium knew they had witnessed something unforgettable. The empty seat remained, but it was no longer silent. It was now the center of a story that had only just begun to travel. When the lights came up for intermission, Carolyn's phone was still buzzing. The family chat had exploded with 41 unread messages. She opened the thread. At the very top, a video clip with Patricia's caption, "Everyone needs to see this." Carolyn pressed play, expecting Sophia's dance. Instead, she saw Matthew's face, heard his measured voice. "My grandmother, Carolyn Hargrove, who chose to be elsewhere today." His words cut through the lobby chatter.
He said my name. In front of everyone.
She replayed the clip. Then again. Each repetition sank deeper. His voice naming her absence, celebrating Rebecca's loyalty. The recital program slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor, its pages scattering. She didn't notice. The intermission buzzed around her. Parents hugged their dancers. Carolyn stood stock still, a statue in peach. The recital would resume without her. The video was still spreading, already in cousins' phones, neighbors' chats. The humiliation was complete. She finally looked up, her face a mask of shame and dawning terror. Her whisper was lost in the noise. "What have I done?" The graduation ended with a final, fading applause. Rebecca sat motionless as the crowd spilled into the aisles. Aunts and uncles surrounded her, their hugs tight, their murmurs a mix of awe and apology for years of overlooking.
Rebecca, that speech is already on a dozen phones. He did what you never could.
Matthew walked toward them, diploma in hand, and met his mother's eyes with a quiet, steady nod. In the family group chat, the messages cascaded. Shock, praise for Matthew, and a heavy, conspicuous silence about Carolyn. Across town, Carolyn typed with trembling fingers. She stared at the screen, then sent the message before she could lose her nerve. "Carolyn Hargrove, I'm on my way to the reception." Rebecca read the notification, and her pulse quickened. She squeezed David's hand until her knuckles whitened.
We knew this was coming. Let Matthew handle it. He's earned that right.
The reception hall buzzed as the family arrived, but the shadow of that empty seat clung to every conversation. 2 hours after the ceremony, Carolyn Hargrove walked into the reception hall, still in her peach dress from the recital. She scanned the crowded banquet room until her eyes found Matthew by the dessert table, laughing with classmates. She squared her shoulders and crossed the room, arms already opening for an embrace. Matthew saw her coming and stepped back. One hand came up, palm out, a quiet wall. From the breast pocket of his graduation gown, he pulled a folded sheet of cardstock and held it toward her.
I printed this for you. You can take it home.
Carolyn's fingers closed around the speech, the weight of it heavier than any paper. Matthew didn't wait. He turned and walked back to his friends, not once looking back. She stood frozen, the cardstock trembling in her hand. The first words she read were her own name. Across the hall, Rebecca watched. She did not move toward her mother. Carolyn drifted to a corner and sank into an empty chair. The cardstock shook in her grip. She read the words again. Each line was a name, a date, an absence recorded and immortalized. Across the room, a cluster of aunts glanced at her, then away. The whispers started low and sharp. Rebecca watched, one hand pressed to her own chest. The relief was confusing and cold.
David's hand covered hers. She made this choice, Becca. You don't owe her comfort tonight.
Rebecca's voice was thin. I know, but I still feel like a traitor.
You're not the traitor. You're the one who stayed.
At 10 o'clock, Matthew signaled to his parents. The Reeves family gathered their things and walked toward the exit. Carolyn looked up as they passed. Matthew's gaze didn't flicker. David's didn't either. Rebecca's almost did. But she didn't stop. The glass doors closed behind them. and the reception hall felt suddenly colder. At the Reeves home, well past midnight, Rebecca stood in the kitchen. The teal blouse was still on, the brooch catching the dim light. Then, without warning, her composure cracked. She pressed her palms to the counter and wept.
David was there in seconds, his arms wrapping around her. Let it out, Becca. You earned this cry.
I thought I'd feel guilty, but all I feel is seen. He saw me, David.
The kitchen doorway creaked. Matthew stood there, still in his graduation gown, his tie loose around his collar.
Mom, I need you to know, I don't regret a single word. You deserve to be publicly honored.
He crossed to her and took her hand. Someone had to say it. I was just the one with the microphone.
I've waited my whole life to feel like I wasn't invisible to my own mother, and you gave that to me tonight.
David pulled them both into a rough, unpolished hug. No words, just arms and breath and years of silent endurance finally acknowledged. That hug sealed something permanent. The speech wasn't revenge, it was a restoration. 3 weeks later, a rented van pulled up to a brick dormitory at MIT. The August sun was warm, the future close enough to touch. Rebecca and David carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs. Matthew followed behind, a single-framed item wrapped in newspaper tucked under his arm. In his new room, Matthew unwrapped the frame and set it on the desk, a copy of his valedictorian speech preserved under glass.
I wanted it to be the first thing I see every morning. A reminder of what matters.
When your grandmother called that morning, I almost broke. But you gave me something better than her approval. You gave me yours.
They didn't say Carolyn's name. The empty space where her presence should have been was heavy enough.
She wasn't there for the small moments, and she missed the big one. That's on her. You've done the right thing.
They hugged at the curb, Rebecca holding on a beat longer than she planned. Matthew stood on the dorm steps, watching the van until it turned a corner. His jaw was set, but his eyes were clear. He turned back toward his new life, the framed speech already waiting on his desk, a witness to who showed up and who didn't. In the months that followed, Carolyn sent texts, voicemails, a note. Matthew left them unread. Rebecca, for the first time, didn't rush to mend. She told her mother she needed time. Carolyn's last message read, "I know I've hurt you. Please, just a word." The speech video stayed pinned in the group chat, a quiet reminder. One morning, Rebecca sat at the kitchen table and stared at the empty chair across from her. That chair had been Carolyn's on rare visits. Now it stayed empty, a permanent reminder.
He turned that vacant seat into a monument. He gave me something no apology can undo.
The doorbell didn't ring with apologies. The phone didn't vibrate with changed hearts. She pulled her coffee close. The silence was no longer a wound, it was a boundary. The empty chair caught the morning light, a testament to those who show up and those who don't. Months later, Patricia's video still sat pinned in the family chat. A few hundred views, a dozen shares, and one new comment. Rebecca had typed, "Something my son reminded me. The people who show up are the family you keep." That line carried further than any speech. It showed up in other chats, other families, other people deciding who was worth the seat. The empty chair in the auditorium had been removed by the school, but the image of it stayed. That one chair with its white card became a shorthand in the Reeves family for what mattered and what didn't.
My son gave me back my own story. He wrote me into it as the one who never left.
And every time she looked at her own kitchen chair, empty or filled, she remembered. The absence of one person had taught her exactly who had always been present. She didn't need an apology anymore. She had the truth, spoken loud into a microphone for everyone to hear. The kitchen was quiet, but it was a good kind of quiet. The kind that settles after a storm when you finally know who's standing with you. At MIT, Matthew sat near the window of a lecture hall, a notebook open but untouched. Outside, autumn leaves turned gold. Back in his dorm, the framed speech still held its place on his desk, a quiet anchor. Miles away, Rebecca adopted a new morning ritual. Coffee, quiet, and no dread when the phone buzzed.
The phone wasn't a threat anymore, just a device.
The absence of painful expectation had become a gentle rhythm. No more rehearsing explanations, no more hiding wounds. Matthew had given her that, not through anger but through a truth spoken into a microphone for everyone to hear. And now, months later, the question wasn't whether Carolyn would apologize. It was something larger. For anyone watching, have you ever been the one who wasn't chosen? Have you been the one whose empty seat went unnoticed while someone else got the front row? Sometimes the people who should have shown up never do, and sometimes the ones who do are the family you never had to question. Rebecca's new mornings were simple: coffee, a quiet kitchen, a phone that no longer made her brace before answering.
He didn't just name that empty seat. He filled every seat I'd ever sat in alone, waiting for her.
At MIT, Matthew still received Carolyn's unread messages. They'd piled up, then stopped.
Some silence is a choice. This one is mine.
The family group chat settled. The pinned video remained, but the storm of reactions had faded into a quiet, shared understanding. Rebecca never removed the empty chair from her kitchen. It stayed, but its meaning had changed. It was no longer an accusation. It was a reminder that space left by someone who wouldn't show up could still be filled with peace. David often joined her there, their conversations easy, no longer shadowed by the person who chose to be elsewhere. The graduation seat was gone, but its lesson endured. The people who matter will always find a chair. And Matthew, in his dorm, looked up from his desk and saw his own words framed, a testament to the mother who never missed a moment. A year later, the Reeves kitchen held a small family dinner, just David, Rebecca, and Matthew home for winter break. Carolyn had not been invited. The empty chair from the corner remained there, but no one spoke of her.
Some people never learn, but we don't need them to. We have everything right here.
She thought of her mother, likely across town with Sophia, still convinced she'd done nothing wrong.
But the old ache was gone. The anger had settled into something lighter: acceptance. Later that night, Matthew found his mother on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the winter stars. He sat beside her.
I don't hate her, Mom. I just don't need her approval anymore. And neither do you.
Rebecca nodded, a tear tracing her cheek, not from sorrow but from the final lift of a decades-old weight. Inside, the empty chair from the kitchen had been brought to the porch. It creaked in the cold breeze, no longer a scar, but a victory. And inside, on the mantel, the framed speech caught the moonlight, a witness to who showed up, and who never would. Winter break ended in a blur of snow and goodbyes. Matthew's dorm room welcomed him back, the framed speech still on his desk. At home, the kitchen settled into a new silence, not the tense kind, but the comfortable quiet of two people who had weathered a storm. The empty chair no longer felt like a missing piece. It was just wood and cushion, part of the room.
We don't need her to be whole. We never did.
The pinned video in the family chat had slipped from the top of the feed, but it was never forgotten. Sometimes a new in-law or an old friend would ask about it, and someone would share the link without needing to explain. Carolyn still sent a Christmas card each year, signed only with her initial. Rebecca placed it in a drawer, unopened. The border was no longer a wound. It was simply a truth. Their lives were full without her. The lesson of the empty seat had become a quiet creed. Love wasn't about who filled a chair, but about who never left it empty. In the Reeves home, every chair was finally filled, even the one that stayed empty. The next morning, Rebecca woke before sunrise and sat at the kitchen table alone, the empty chair across from her catching the first light. It no longer accused. It stood as a quiet monument to a boundary finally set and a truth finally spoken.
He gave me back my story. I'm not the forgotten one anymore.
Hundreds of miles away, Matthew opened his laptop. The framed speech on his desk glinted under the desk lamp. That speech had become a family compass, a permanent record of who mattered and who never would. The empty graduation seat was long gone, dismantled by custodians, but its lesson endured. Carolyn's name lived on not as a grandmother, but as a footnote in a valedictorian speech about a mother who never left. Rebecca set down her coffee. The silence in the room was full of the words her son had spoken into a microphone for all to hear. Some absences become answers. Some empty seats become the strongest witnesses. And for the family that showed up, the chairs, whether filled or empty, were always ready.